Y bueno, pues estamos muy alegres de tener aquí, que será moderado por María Fernanda Aguilar Valdés.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you, Elvia. I want to say hello to everyone. Welcome to this panel. We are so happy to be talking about working with positive masculinities. We are going to be so you can start asking your questions. Let's begin. Mexico has gender violence. We have to address this problem. Women are violated and murdered and victimized by individuals and institutions. Violence is a structural problem requiring complex solutions. This panel wants to generate a dialogue which is dynamic to look into youth and gender violence issues with also working with masculinities and young aggressors. I would start rather with a question. Can we eradicate gender violence if this is discussed only among women? Yes, Yair, Rafa, and Marco, tell us who you are and tell us about this question I'm asking. Yes, hello, Fernanda, thank you for inviting me in the space to make this type of reflection and discussion. Certainly, violence may end if it's only addressed among women. I doubt it. I think in our organization, we look at it in a different manner, and we work with men, and we have the masculinity approach. Our dream is for all men of this country and planet are committed with change towards substantial changes and equality, of course. And this is something we're working on. And this is, we are going to be talking about in our conversatory. Yes, Rafa, Marco, can you tell us a little bit about this? Marco Valencia, thank you so much from Mexico City. Thank you, Sidmex, for inviting us. Well, no, I think this issue cannot just be dealt with by women. I mean, I think we have to look at this as something that's has different responsibilities to transfer this problem only to women. I don't think that's the right thing to do. And we are trying to incentivize new projects that are collective projects, not only seen as something regarding women, but diversity. It's usually the most vulnerable sector of our society. Women are. Thank you. Rafa, could you comment on this? Yes, good afternoon. Rafael Limones of Supera in Monterrey. This is the first question, allowing us to make so many reflections, critical perspectives on what women go through in contexts of violence. And I want to say that this cannot just be dealt with by women, because violence is not generated by women. We men generate violence. That's why it's important for us to take this responsibility of attributing our ideas and changing our ideas and thoughts. How can we stop being violent against women and violent with other men? Therefore, work with masculinity becomes a crucial axis in society, in governments. If we cannot eradicate masculine violence, we are not going to be able to eradicate other violences and crimes. Thank you, Rafa. Can you tell me a little bit about your project? What strategies are you implementing, please? Yes, please, Jair. Let me tell you, Agenda is an organization created over 15 years ago. We work with men that have been attackers because we are violence perpetrators in Mexico, the main ones, I mean. We've been trying to develop a methodology for this type of audience. We know we have to include so many social, political, cultural working areas, and not just accompany men, but education is of the utmost importance. And this is very key in our work. We've realized there are other areas of opportunity to generate research from different social phenomena, starting with masculinity. We have to look at our own identity and personalities at work. So we have to look into pornography issues, to human trafficking. All those issues have a relationship with gender perspectives. And generally, we do different types of interventions with all types of audiences, lectures, seminars, so many things we organize. Always bearing in mind the protagonistic role of masculinities, but not only to look at masculinities, because we want to contribute to substantial change. That is, we want to work with men for the well-being of women and general social harmony. And it means working with positive masculinities, alternative masculinities, to have peace processes that are really more solid. So it's not just a matter of promoting a lot of publications. We do have a website. I invite you to look at it, but we want to work with different types of people, with children, with youth, mixed audiences, adults, migrants, students as well, etc. So we can share all this knowledge with you. And we want to always bounce it back and forth so that we can improve it. Thank you. Thank you so much. Super important. Rafa Marco, can you tell us about your project and your strategies, please? Thank you, Fer. I coincide with what Jair just said. In effect, a lot of this analysis and diagnosis of the problem, which is the result of male chauvinism, of the machismo phenomenon. This has to do with grassroots projects. We've been working on this. We started always looking into violence generated in communities as of our work with youth, understanding that the part of structural violence comes from the home, from the household. Our women and men users live in marginalized areas in urban centers that very often have a lot of crimes. We're working with the Super organization in the Monterrey metropolitan area. We now have protocols, activities, tools. We've been trying to spread the word locally first with the support of local governments, of course, but especially in this wealth and richness of projects. Supera, this is a project seeking to reduce youth violence juvenile violence through different mechanisms, working with communities, with cognitive behavioral therapy and photography. Rafa will talk about it in greater detail, but we do want to do this working with youth, but always supporting community work among peers, neighbors, receiving communities for reinsertion, and with couples. And we want youth to ask themselves, why am I repeating the same thing? Why am I transforming this into violent behaviors? So this is the context. Rafael will give you more details. Thank you so much. Let me share the screen with you. I want to show you what we're working on, as Marco just mentioned. Well, let me give you the context. Where are we working? Where are we located in violence? Masculinity is based on machismo, patriarchal relations, and sexism. Therefore, this is related to femicides, homicides, and the way we learn to be men. In this chronic violence context, we have circumstances linked to crime, homicides, hostilities, harassment, and these are the young people we work with. We have structural violence based on lack of opportunities, labor opportunities, and social exclusion throughout 41 years. Well, that's when Supera was created over 41 years ago. We've been working in different spaces where those incidences take place and direct violence. For that, we have to generate a behavioral change to re-educate violent masculine behavior and also to avoid criminal histories and thus be able to design masculinity models, but non-violent models that are not connected to crimes and other offenses. So chronic violence means we have to change attitude. We have to identify spaces to create relational activities for community and for peace in those communities through changes in cultural beliefs to detain the scaling of violence through the participation of international organizations. We're working in civic models to stop violence in communities. This is based on this very structural way of seeing things. This is where we're working. The red parts here, homicides in the metropolitan area of Monterrey. And then the blue ones, the poor people. Those are the communities. I live around here. This is where we do a lot of work in terms of masculinities, especially with the purpose of stopping violence against women, masculine violence against women. This is not only a gender perspective, we see it as gender justice. The gender perspective, we agree with it. People have been working on it in Mexico for over 40 years, but today we have to remember gender justice. What have we done? What do we still have to do? What do we men have to do to reduce that violence? Because there's a direct attribution with all the components. We're working at the community level with identity, with endless activities, and we want to generate peaceful coexistence at the community level. Yes, this is the approach we have. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Rafa. Yes, it is extremely important to see the work you are doing. Now let me give the floor to Tanya. She can tell us about her work. and about herself. Why is it important to include men and women in peace building measures? Yes, thank you. As Fernanda said, I'm Tanya Lanús. I'm part of the Research Center for Peace. I've been there for about 5 years. This is in Mexico. We are promoting gender perspective in peace building measures. I think the importance of working hand in hand with men and women to eradicate gender violence is key in all this. There are two important things that have to do with empowering women. This is also a key element. Without those women, there's nothing we can do. They are part of the movement. Without them, we never would have what we have or have the rights that we have. Definitely, we have to start working hand in hand with men and projects and strategic programs to eradicate gender violence, to understand where it comes from. I think that's key in our work. Where does it come from? And this is something we're going to look at in the following section. Structural violence, where does it come from? We are part of a system. This system in Mexico is teaching us that it's a patriarchal system. It has disenfranchised women in many ways. Among them, we have gender violence. Yes, this is, of course, attacks against women. If we don't work hand in hand, all of us in our trenches, well, eradicating gender violence will be an extremely difficult issue. And as Marco said, it is too much responsibility only for women. Yes, of course, Tanya. Now we have a question here. I want to include it in our panel. What changes do you think there have to be in education in Mexico to contribute towards the construction of positive masculinities? Please, Yair, thank you. Very good question. Well, we are mainly working on what we understand of gender socialization. This socialization process has to do with social spaces, cultural education spaces, through which we are reinforcing our gender identities. And those spaces, of course, have to do with the home, where people live, gender relations. And before we are born, we have part of our personality determined by someone who is not us. So this socialization of gender is multiplied as we grow, and we start really reinforcing this in our teenage years and when we are adults and senior citizens. So it's not enough to intervene in the education sector that has to do with the content of the textbooks in schools, academic contexts of teachers at the national university or any career to be a teacher, and also with training processes. Yes, we have to look into this. We have to have eradication protocols, and this is something very important. So it has to do with theory, with what the books say, what the authors of those books say, but we continue education always. It has to do with the media, with political, religious, cultural institutions. It has to do with all the spaces we are working in and how we see other identities. And through this confrontation, then we can think about our own gender personality. In this sense, in our organization, we have a book that's called Public Policy Proposals. There we have ideas on the education sector, but also many more, so that we can carry out cultural changes in Mexico for us to intervene in the justice system, the education system. But we're going to continue looking at roles people play on television, for instance, and this has to do with a front we have to expand. And we have to look at all the spaces so that we have more than just a few people there. I think the answer is quite a complex thing, but it's easy compared to the problem we're facing. Yes, of course. Thank you, Yair. Well, we've already said how important it is to include men in solution building, and they're part of the problem, of course, no doubt about it. So I wanted to ask you, how do you think your organizations are contributing towards peace building? For this, Tanya, please, could you help us clarify what peace is? Could you define it, please? As it makes the way we see peace. The main thing is that peace is not only the absence of violence, is not only the absence of war. Peace is a complex thing, something that's so ambiguous that it has become such a big problem, an issue, that we cannot really understand it as a concept. There are so many concepts related to peace. In the countries of the South, for instance, they see peace as development, as the lack of poverty, lack of inequality. The northern countries see peace as a process of disarmament. And with this difference, we can start understanding the complex element related to peace. I like to do a differentiation. There's negative peace, the absence of violence and war, and the fear to violence, fear of violence, and then the fear of absence of war. And then the positive piece is a lot more than that. It has to do with attitudes, institutions, and structures that create and sustain peaceful societies. This means that there are different ways of measuring it. There are also other 8 pillars of peace. They are all different. Among them, we have the lack of corruption, and also good government, and the acceptance of other people's rights. And within this, we have seen we are lacking so many things. We have to accept other people's rights. For instance, there we could fit the gender issue into all this. Yes, we believe in our organization that definitely we still have to introduce the gender issue in peace building in a very specific way, according to the 8 pillars, for us to be able to understand this better. That's the way we see it. And well, we've already mentioned structural violence. This panel is also mentioning this. So structural violence is everything coming from institutions, everything that's created. That's what Yair was saying a few minutes ago. That is issues related to gender violence, and those issues have to be worked on at all levels, at all different fronts, to be able to find a solution that is more comprehensive, more interdisciplinary solution, so that hand in hand we can work on those solutions, because this is something that will take time. This is a long-term. It has to do with long-term policies and strategies, because structural violence and gender structural violence specifically makes us understand where violence lies, where does it come from, which are the problems creating violence, and which are the issues, people who exert violence, what problems do they have, why are they aggressive, why are they violent, where does it come from, what is their culture, what is the stereotype they have, what thoughts go through their minds so that they become violent. This is the part we're mainly working on. This is part of our work to understand gender structural violence. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Very well. Now, Rafa and Marco, could you tell us a little bit of how you believe your organizations are contributing towards peace building? We understand it not only as the absence of violence, but structures and institutions and forms of building peace using other forms and methods. Could you comment on this, please? Yes, yes, very good. Thank you. Should I start? Yes. Well, thank you. Now, following what Tanya was just commenting, one of the comments this morning, rather, in the panel this morning, someone said the different types of peace. So understanding that this is not really a context that we can easily land on from different ramifications or different ways of seeing at it or working at it from the academy or the government side. I think a fair term, a precise term, is the absence of fights over conflicts. I mean, this is like understanding the problem and taking this possibility to communities to see absence of conflicts, of fights, individual ones, collective fights, community fights that have to do with political issues. And in this sense, through our program together with Supera and the project we're working on, the projects we just finished, it has to do with giving this to the community, not only institutional foundations, but for it to materialize on the grassroots level. That's why we are talking about civic justice and how, as of an everyday expeditious justice, to materialize and solve community conflicts so that people will find a way out whenever they have a problem, and so that they are not running risks. How can we do this? We as organizations should be able to offer them this type of project. So it is a little like visualizing a prevention chain, which is an institutionalized chain. Of course, the first contact with the community, the first respondent at the community level, and we are looking at this communication channel of collaboration among authorities. So this is reflected a little on new positive masculinities and masculinities of awareness operating in the Monterrey metropolitan area. I insist, it's not just generating this unilateral or bilateral channels. It is a matter of really giving it all we have, all of us. This is a majuscule situation. It is surpassing the government, surpassing the possibilities of any organization and individual capacity. So we should see it this way. I think not seeing it this way, it's a mistake. We could therefore fail if we don't have enough capacity. So we want to strengthen municipalities to launch a local justice system that in reality may attend to the needs of these fronts. Yes, thank you very much, Rafa. Now, can you tell us a little bit more about this, Yair? Yes, of course. As I was telling you, when we started our organization, we wanted to create a culture of a different way of treating women and treating themselves as men and between the sexes. So that's what we wanted. We want equality, nonviolence and justice. And Rafa mentioned justice. It has so much to do with gender violence, gender justice rather. And this has to do with a contract, a social contract, reconfiguring the way we understand human relations. That is myself with my own body as a man, and myself with other men and with other women, of course. So this is the way we've been identifying how we can contribute towards this cultural transformation for peace building. That is through this analysis of the roots, the root cause, this scenario. And this has to do with giving free rein to this macho, to this male chauvinism. And this has been happening at the individual and collective manner. Collectively, as Tanya said, structural violence and how institutions, political institutions have participated in what about strategies to deal with social problems and issues. Public policy programs are outlined through men whose personality has the macho hegemonic masculinities. We want to contribute to peace, challenging, asking, how do we understand each other as men? How are we building ourselves? How can we incentivize everything? And how can we look at the macho, the male chauvinist features and traits that I am projecting, but also at the labor level and institutional and also at home. All these institutions in this country, as in all countries of the world, well, were built by men before women could occupy spaces in those institutions. And look at what has been happening, so many problems. Let us imagine what masculinity was when they first created those institutions. So we have to question this. We have to challenge this situation, because it was not just wanting to do things, that's not enough. We have to look at mass cultural changes. That's why we have a public policy agenda, but also many spaces, research, because everything touches everything else, and everything is part of the same sum of things. Yes, thank you so much. You've told us about your projects, but now I wanted to know more about challenges you are facing. Could you define in 3 words challenges in the implementation of your work, in your institution, in your organization? Marco, Rafa, please. Rafa, please, you can start. Yes, clearly, I want to tell you 3 words. It's kind of complicated. You said 3 words, right? Well, this is also like a question I'm posing: how to generate perception changes of masculinity in the community. Well, we've been talking about this for 30 minutes now. And yes, there is a direct relationship with the construction of spaces, of households, people, and gender itself. And also from the significance of peace. Peace, what does it really signify for a man? If this man is based on those macho structures, patriarchal, violent structures, and what does peace signify for a woman who's victim of so much violence in her own generational relationship? So in those significances and meanings, there are so many challenges: the generational issue, the construction we have between what we think and believe about peace, but also in terms of violence, and how from that point the challenge becomes learning, a learning process of re-education, the generational level for men and women. We as men, how do we rearrange, recompose episodes of violence we have gone through in difficult moments, but the impact violence has had in communities, and this becomes a second challenge. Chronic violence we're now experiencing because of organized crime situations, and also masculine male violence in homes, in households. The men participating as a main actor. He is a participant, an actor exerting this violence, and those cultural changes are necessary. Another generational challenge has to do with culture. How do we standardize this? How are we normalizing this violence? But what about the peace processes? We see it as something outside of us, ambiguous, and something that has nothing to do with ourselves. When peace building is something we can do in the community, let us live the community. This means an action of intervention we are doing in the community, where we establish relational ties and links with people in the community, with women, mothers, parents, children, boys and girls, and youth, to create campaigns aimed at contexts determining the zones of insecurity in the community, to regenerate spaces where the community can get together, and therefore also, as said a few minutes ago, to stop violence, understood as the absence, in this case, of peace. So this is a major challenge we face. How do we generate this understanding in this, and how to understand the context? And above all, we should have the gender perspective, or gender justice. So peace building seen from gender justice. Very well, Rafa. Now, Yair, which are the challenges you have faced in the implementation of your work? Yes, Of course, thank you. As Rafa said, it's difficult, Fernanda, to just say it in 3 words. So let me take a few minutes. However, I have identified 3 words: the resistance, challenges we face, and this has to do with male chauvinism, the machismo phenomenon. This is keeping the status quo and having privileges, especially always for men, of course. And then the second one has to do with indifference. Many people could perhaps be very good partners, allies, but they don't see themselves, they don't relate to this violent situation, and the ways in which we manifest our inequalities. And the third one has to do with lack of understanding, not understanding the importance, value, and justification of this type of spaces. Not only that, but also of challenging things, readdressing, revisiting a lot of the social norms that lead the way we relate to each other, and also our own personality, the personality we each develop. And this machismo and this male chauvinism is not only affecting people around us, but also people that are making decisions on public policies and budgets, and people who decide or not to continue reproducing stereotypes and gender roles in spaces of communication, creed, religion, and the academy itself. So these are the 3 words that we think define this very well. Those challenges, generally, they are basically resistance of the patriarchal structure to fall, but it is falling and we are demolishing it. We're tearing it down. Yes, this is very important. Opening spaces for understanding and opening spaces where you can tell us about your own vision of things, and doing this, turning it into a common effort to be able to promote it. This is very important, of course. So now, Tanya, could you tell us about difficulties in between theory and the operational aspect of the project? Tanya, could you tell us about this, please? A lot of theories going on here and there. People are theorizing so much, but how can we really implement this? Which are the challenges? Yes, a lot has been done. We still have to do so many more things. There are theories, but we could have more theory. So there are 2 things. The first one would be we need more theory with gender perspective. And the second one is theory that exists, because it does exist. It is tremendously difficult to make it operational. Because you've mentioned here many challenges, and the same goes for, you know, peace. And what about peace building in projects? Because peace is something which is quite a big concept. So the difficulty of launching projects that may be accessible for people, in which we understand them in the right way, what peace means, how to go about doing this, because peace is a peace construction, peace building as such takes a long time, it is long term. And many times it might not be attractive for donors. They're not going to see short-term results. This is not something they can see now and then, immediately. I mean, and we have quantitative measurements and then you have peace. No, this is long-term work. And so it is very difficult to look at the quantitative. How can we translate it into operational strategies, projects that are like peace building projects that we don't see them. The donors are not always ready to participate in this, but the good news is that, yes, shedding light on this situation, a little bit of light, we see projects as such, peace projects specifically to have peace building measures, but we perhaps don't see that so much. But other projects like the Supera project, well, these projects as such are peace building projects. Perhaps they don't have the word peace included in their work, in their launching of projects, but these are projects that are building peace in one way or the other. I will talk about this later on if you allow me. Yes, thank you. Very good. Now talking about challenges.
I would like to talk about COVID-19 and to talk about what are the challenges that you have faced from the pandemic point of view, and we'll see the aspect of all of this. Yes, of course. Part of the pandemic is something, we've seen it throughout the world, and we're talking about from the male perception, there's more resistance in this. Then also we had to adapt, we had to innovate in order to come up with virtual treatment with men. And we can see with this concentration of people in small confined spaces, violence increases, particularly male violence. But there's an important challenge that we need to mention, that it's more in this reflective part. And from this point of view, and this what it means to the current movements, and we call this critical feminism. Gloria Gonzalez with the colonization of what's female. This colonization from the machismo point of view, from patriarchy, where we replicate all the machismo type of practices, and that can be replicated to in males. Violence cannot be debated with violence, but I mentioned that there could be violence factors against men. Men have to stop, rethink the figure that we have as responsible parties of what we do. And with the situation of COVID, to look for the right treatment, because resistance to this male violence, to violence of women, maybe they would run a higher risk, and the female homicides would increase, of male homicides would increase. And we see a series of follow-ups close to this population, and it's clear. Male violence has multiple manifestations, and one of them, it's right in front of us. In prior meetings, we have seen the emergency line that you're implementing with situation of COVID. Stress has increased. And how has this affected all those that benefit from the Hendrix program? Yes, of course, I'm going to share this with you. What brought Hendrix to life is to work with males that have generated violence and the structure of living this way. Because of COVID, these groups that are live, re-education 4 times a week, they had to be taken to be live. And something that really triggered our concern to develop this emergency line is to acknowledge that some of these men usually call their therapist, and they see some people somewhere, and the person that is facilitator of the group, and now they're going back to their homes, and they can see an increase. And there's the emergency line was created to try to turn around the source of service that would acknowledge these triggers in men, because many campaigns make women responsible to stop domestic violence, but what is not there are programs that would call a man that say, do not be violent. If we can identify what are the tools that can be generated in order to not to fall in that type of violence.
So from the main findings that we have, thanks to the emergency line, there's 6 main causes that have triggered this activity of violence by men. Maybe I can share this with you. And this is part of different things that I think it's so valuable. From over 500 calls that we have received. And this is something the first 3 months of the quarantine or lockdown. And here we were able to identify that any element that would damage the male identity of males is going to trigger this, that the reaction of men, macho men, are going to trigger concern that are defensive because of frustration, and all of these emotions are triggered with some of these elements of financial uncertainty, because maybe their income was reduced. So to be the head of the family and provider, that's damage for hegemonic masculinity. That's something. And also being together and being confined, the domestic space traditionally was for women. So men were at the public space. So when we're sent home, we start being frustrated, and violence is trigger, as well as a spontaneous paternity to try to, just realize of everything that has to do with housework, that is not just to get home and everything is ready, but it is unpaid job that is unacknowledged. And now that they are at home, they're constantly at each other's throats, and they're not robots. They have feelings. They like a physical context. We miss our colleagues that we play with. We want to do so many things. And the last one that is important to acknowledge is that we're able to be afraid, and that we want to show all of these emotions. These are the findings that we find the first 3 months. We want to define something that you're going to be asking later. From the elementary education or basic education, what can we do to work on educating with responsible masculinity? Yes. This is something that has to be taken into consideration, because basic education, for example, that go into the basics globally, unfortunately, spaces are open to the community, responsible paternity. The young men and women, children today, they have a topic that is to question this education that has been received and to socialize not only in the school spaces, but with their parents, their families, the way in which they determine how they act within their families. This has been said in the other interventions throughout the Congress, but to break this prototypes in gender associated to masculinity, like we have been learning, this is something that we can see workshops with the parents. There are homes that are single parents, and also the transition of topics with children and we have to be knocking at the doors in the education system. I think there are different instances that could be complementing these topics that, to be honest, I don't even think that even the teachers know so well. So it would not be responsible just to consider the things that are going to be dealt with at school, but multiple disciplines that have to be dealt with this topic. And also what Tanya said, peace needs all these institutions and all of this that is promoted by the government, by the civil society, to change mentality, to work from a very young age in these topics about the new masculinity. Thank you, Marco. We've talked about the challenges with COVID, but we want to talk about the results of this project. So please tell us, Rafa, about what are the results that they've had us in the programs. We're talking about sexuality. One of the biggest concerns for men is sexuality. The sexuality of their children is even more. When we're talking about schools, we're talking about also teenage pregnancy, something that we worked on because it's a link to other type of sexual violence. To get to the starting point, how do we see things? How do we work in the projects and the different results? This is a program that is looking to go over male sexuality and also for them and link to all of them. How is this violence linked to other episodes of being prone to crime or to crime itself? The group of young people, transforming young people, it's a gear to population that meets Wednesday night, Thursday, Wednesday to Thursday, where there's a lot of crime, and we're looking to work with them. Any situation of severe violence in any situation, with a process where we look for the young people and we connect them. The last project with civil justice, freedom, and awareness, where we have seen how pre and post has hostility gone down, and hostility linked to other concepts of violence, like violence against women, violence that linked to willingness to be prone to violence, and crime, and all the different processes among them, from 160 young people that we care for in the programs, attached to a decrease of maybe petty crimes. There was no desertion that they could have in petty crime in their own communities. And we have some young people with a high level of willingness to get rid of or leave this violent situation in family context. And around masculinity, where they have been affected by the organized crime 10 years ago, how the effect of the war against drug trafficking when they were children or teenagers, and how this is linked to their masculinity, linked to organized crime. Jade, can you tell me about what the results that you have seen in your projects? I go back to the crown jewel that is the methodology of reivindication for men. Fortunately, this was taken back several years ago by some government institutions and this capacity in other states to see groups of men that are changing to change their behaviors in other states. We have been able to broaden care in Mexico in this model of attention to other countries. The identification of this need for the decision makers and the important is to look at this because through the systemization of results we have found favorable changes. We relate these results with context studies. So we interview their partners, their relatives to counteract what they see. What is the impact that they're having through this intervention? And this is one of the results that really makes us proud. With this methodology that can be taken further, as Rafael says, this could take to end the masculinity of everyone. It's not the same in Mexico City that in Monterrey, Mérida, Chihuahua, or Chiapas, so that even more outside of the country. And through this, we have gathered so much valuable information that has really enriched the research and that has brought a lot of publications. Likewise, this information, this knowledge that is systematized and that is studied by gender at least helps to generate strategies of public incidents, political incidents. So these terms are taking to you know, to everybody's language because we want a high quality massive impact. So we need to have our decision makers, but we have our everyday citizens, right? So this is exactly what we want. We wanted to look at everything, and this is an indicator of, and we want to hear the meetings that we have in December. A lot of them do not have a happy ending, but they have a personal happy ending. And that is wonderful because these people are, you know, they are those people that are going to communicate. They're going to be preaching what they're learning in any concept, in any different context where they're at. Briefly, just trying to bring all of this between challenges, results, and the part between theory and creativity. Really, unfortunately, in projects for violence prevention, there's this part is not really good. It's not very good, even from the gender perspective. A lot of us do not have this, and there are so many publications that we have seen this topic, but unfortunately, this switch to a model that can be operated, that is evidence-based, is sad how this is not structured in a permanent manner in the models for attention and violence prevention. I believe that all this evidence that is created with the lack of data, statistics, unfortunately make it difficult that all this theory goes down to a context of working with the user. So beyond the capacities I think this is very important part that we should take into account in a situation where unfortunately we do not have the component in many of the problems and the solutions that we can find. Thank you, Marco. I would like that in 2 words, you can tell me what do you think when you see the results that have been achieved with these programs? Rafa, Yair, can you tell me about this? It gives me a sense of hope. I'm afraid as well, somehow. Why are you afraid? That this is a short project. There are good things that we're doing in Nuevo León, throughout the country, and this concern is based on gender-based injustice of whoever decides on the budgets to learn these topics on prevention of violence based on violence. There's no question that we can move forward. We can stop female homicides, homicides at large, and we can think that we have better specialists at the places we are, so we can stop violence against women and the young. That's why we're concerned. There's hope because we're going to get elsewhere, because there's no question that this is going to turn into harmony, and being convinced of that this can be done, and that in Nuevo León we have a group that really believes on this, that they know and are convinced of what we want to do. So this hope increases, and it is not that being afraid will weaken hope. Yair, tell me a little bit, what are the things that come to mind? I'm going to repeat being hopeful, and to start looking at good results, to start looking at positive impact, always gives you hope in what you do and in the findings that you can have to replicate this. The hope of looking at this, that change is possible, is not only possible, but we can make it. And as we have more and more challenges before us, whether they're institutional, abstract, by somebody in politics, for example, and public policies, budgeting, or just everyday citizens. So it gives me hope. On the other hand, it makes me hopeful. It's a virtuous circle to see positive impacts. It gives me incentives and motivates me to continue looking at this. How else can we be going about having the benefit, and how can we improve everyone in society? Because all of a sudden, this can be an argument of this topics about gender justice, equality. These are for women, and men are not affected. It makes me hopeful to break down this type of arguments, and to get more preachers of equality and nonviolence. Of course, Yair, projects like the ones that you are pushing with Supera and Gendes and with the PRAY program, I'm sure that this can be achieved. Thank you so much. I want to add a question here for Tanya. What can we do in our everyday life in order to contribute to the construction of positive masculinity? I don't know if it's a woman, it's a man. Before I answer, I want to say that we have not talked about the LGBT community, and to talk about all the topics about positive masculinity. This is work towards these groups that are the most vulnerable ones. So I just wanted to add a little bit of this. And what can everybody do? You know, just the general population do to start building positive families? I think they can do so many things. Everybody can do their own little thing to start changing. I believe that we all are working on this. I don't think anybody was born feminist, and I don't think any man was born questioning their privilege. So I think that first we need to have a process of awareness. What am I doing? How was I raised? To question everything, to question how were we raised, the fact of me wearing, you know, earrings. I was never asked whether I wanted to have earrings or not. And this is what Jair was talking about, all of this thing about gender that says, okay, you were born and you're going to be called Tanya because biologically you are a woman, so you're going to have to act a certain way, you're going to have to follow certain patterns, and a little bit is where if you don't follow, well, maybe you're going to be killed, you're going to be raped because your skirt was too short, and all of these things start happening. So positive masculinity is built every day if we question everything, gender patterns that we're born with, if we question what we're being taught, and a little bit supporting and understanding the movement. I think is very important because the lack of information, myths, that are so many in gender equality, masculinity, make it very difficult to start building new masculinity that is positive. We don't know. And as you say, this is an effort that needs time, and it needs this type of spaces where we can build together and is not isolated as a factor because it's a key factor of the problem, and it can be integrated in order to build new forms. Now is one of the favorite moments of this panel. And for this, I want to introduce two people, Israel G. and Juan Carlos Grimaldo. He asked us to call him WIPO. They're beneficiaries of Supera and Gendes, and they're going to witness what their experience has been since they started with this project. For this part, Tanya is going to be helping me co-moderating some of the questions that we're going to be asking. It's important that they both know that they can not answer if they want. Feel free to answer the questions that we're going to ask, but if you don't want, you don't have to. I would like to give the floor to Tanya, who's going to start with the first question, and let's hear it from them. I want to ask Wipo and Israel a little bit. If you can tell me your story, what convinced you to be part of this program? What convinced me is that they were interested in us. Nobody else was interested in us. Where we live, people tend to criticize you a lot. They just look at the way things look. When they arrive, we used to think that they were police officers, and we would just go just because we wanted to mock them. And maybe they were going to say something to us. And little by little, they really earned our respect. When we started with the program, I called it Family Real. And they have, they're now my second family. They're with me in good and bad. So I saw that they were interested in me, and that's why I decided to become part of the program. Thank you. Israel? Welcome. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Unfortunately, I I am not going to show my face because I'm going through a legal process because of domestic violence. The reason for this violence is because of the crisis in the pandemic. As it has been mentioned, my salary was cut down to 30% and an uncertainty of whether I'm going to be able to bring money home. And I became violent towards my partner and one of her coworkers. So I really hit rock bottom. I found this space and I was able to deal with the problem that I have, and I'm here. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. I want to ask a question. First, Wipo, you mentioned that they earn your respect. How did they do that and why? How did you get to say, oh, now I trust them? The truth is that I was hooked. I came from, they almost killed me. I got a bullet on my head. And like the other guy said, you hit rock bottom. I was selling drugs. I was fighting all the time. And I had a friend called Saul. And we were always together. We were up and down together, all over the place. The things that you learn in gangs, we started going with them. And as I mentioned, when you least expect them, or from when you least expected it was them, they were there for you. Like I had problems with my family. I had problems of drug addiction. I broke up with my wife. I split up from my wife. And that's when I started to, they started earning my respect because they wouldn't, you know, I sent them a message and 24/7 they were there. And I was really surprised because these are people that they really like what they do. They don't feel that it is because it's their job, that you feel that they're really into their friends. They're really your friends. They made me grow up. They made me think about how to choose my friends. I started to start doing like a type of meditation, and that helped me a lot with my problems. Right now, I have grown thanks to what they have shown me a different way to look at life. And that's the way they earn my respect, because I was so much into the bad things that a lot of people in my neighborhood wanted to kill me. And they showed me a different way to look at things. And they really caught my attention because they were concerned about me, my daughter. They showed me a different way of looking at life. Israel, you mentioned that you hit rock bottom, that you got to a point where you said, that's it, I'm at the bottom. How did you realize that? What made you think? And you said things have to change. After these situations where I was being violent against my partner, I started using alcohol. I didn't have a lot of work and I stopped working because I was hungover when I woke up in the morning and I didn't feel good enough to go to work. I started realizing that my children looked at me and they look afraid. And when they left the house, I looked for the help at Hendest, that it was through through the hotline, somebody that I really care for at Hendest, Arturo. He took my call and he said we were going to get out of this together. So I really hope that I can get together with my family, because when they left, I started looking for them. I started looking for her. I started looking for my partner. And at Hendes, I learned that I had to respect her space. Thank you. I'm going to give Fer the floor. So you can talk about this structural gender violence that is happening. Thank you. Tell me about your childhood and how did you see your father figure? Was he there? Was he absent? Can you tell me a little bit? Rafa, the truth is, yes, I had a hard time with my father. When you're little, you want to be like your dad. They tell you, you have to be like me. And you see things that maybe you shouldn't see for your age. Now I understand that things affected me, and I said, I'm like that because, and I don't want to be like that. Nobody's going to tell me I am because I want to. And now that I reflect on this, there's so many things. You know, I'm really mad at him, but thanks to the therapies, I used to fight him a lot. And in the past few days, there were serious situations going on, and I wanted to kill him. 4 days ago, I had a knife and I really wanted to kill him. And I said, I was so mad at him because he did something bad against my mother. And I was so mad. And violence against, there's so much psychological damage to women that it's like they need it. They need, like she needed my dad, you know. She's my mother and she doesn't deserve to live like that. And I'm even worse, it's because my mother has really helped me get out, move forward, and I said, I'm gonna kill them both. I have to walk through 2 neighborhoods to get to their home. And I used drugs and I didn't eat. For 3 days, and throughout the time I was using, I was smelling glue. And then I started thinking about my daughter. I started thinking about everything I've done. Everything that I have built. I have a degree in photography and I was told that I was not worth anything. And I thought about all of this. And I said, I'm not going to lose everything that I have done for somebody that is not worth it. I don't know if it's okay or if it's bad, but it helped me think. I'm not going to do it for them. I'm going to do it for my daughter. So my daughter doesn't see what I had, that my daughter can feel proud of me. Thank you, Rafa. Right now, or in this areas of violence that you have gone through, what has been the factor that somehow has helped you decide right now? I had a change in the neighborhood where I live, in the way I live, and you know, in a neighborhood where there's a lot of problems. When I was 15, they cut my ear. You know, there's so many things. Last time, 2 months ago, I used my knife and I hit someone. My neighborhood, they call machismo. Everybody's going against everyone. I'm sorry to say this. And now that I have moved here, I've seen 2 or 3 guys that bother me with my daughter, with my wife. I had the opportunities to see so many things. They were there with the photography, and what I was able to communicate through photography is a different path, a different opportunity. I've had so many opportunities. And, you know, somebody was trying to fight me. Nobody, you know, if I hit him, nobody knows me. You know, it's a man. I'm going to hit him. My daughter is going to cry. And, you know, I can lose a quiet life. There are 2 months that I've had peace in my life. So isn't that worth it? Thanks to them, everything that I've had that has taught me to be more mature from this point of view, for someone that is not even interested in me, to lose everything for someone that is not even worth it. That's what I have learned, that I have to fight for myself and for those who love me. Isra, can you tell us a little bit about your childhood, your father figure, how you associate your father figure and how you perceive your father now? I call him the old man. He used to punish us a lot, me and my brother. Every time that we thought we were just being mischievous, he would hit us with a belt. He would pull our ears or our hair. I remember that. I remember they blame my mother of our education. He has always blamed her. He has always said that we are a result of her and that we're bad children. He has said that to us. I remember, like Wipo, at one point when I was in high school, he used to say that the only thing that I was going to be a criminal, that I was going to end up being a rapist or a murderer. And when I was in jail, I was going to have to call him so he could get me out of there. I was really mad at him. Even once I confronted him physically. And what have I learned today? I've learned that he's a human being that suffered a lot of violence when he was a child. Since he was 5, he had to support his younger brothers and sisters. To know that he was, you know, that happened to him. Maybe today he says, "Oh, son, I love you, I miss you." Maybe I don't feel the same, but I don't feel that hatred that I felt before. I feel compassion for him now. I feel that he suffers. It hurts me not to be able to tell my father that I love him, that I care for him. But I know that if I go down to his level, as he says, I'm just going to become him, what I always hated. So at least in Gendes, I've been told that things flow better under the view of love. That's what I can say. Thank you, Israel, how important this is. Thank you for sharing this with us. What I would like to know is, how has this had an influence in the way that you're a father? As a father, this experience has left you what? Up to a few months ago, before the pandemic, I used to be like that. When they would be doing their homework with their mother and they were tired, I would repress them. Usually, I would hit them. I would be physically violent with them. Today, I see that instead of feeling love for me, they are afraid of me. And I see myself when I was a child, and I feel bad because they're afraid of me, and I try. And I have learned not to ask for forgiveness, because asking for forgiveness in this type of spaces are not good for anything, because it's, you know, it's, no, my commitment is to create relationships of equality. There's one thing that we call commitments, where I made a commitment to create well-being for me and other people. In this case, I'm talking about my children. That's what it is. That's the paternity that I'm exercising nowadays. Thank you. Thanks to both. I want to know, all of this that you mentioned, this is part of the structure of violence. It's not just a reason or justification, and you don't misunderstand me, but it's to understand context in which people, men and women, execute or exercise violence. So the third question that we would like to ask is to both, is, did you grow seeing differences between the education of you with your cousins, your cousin, women cousin or sisters? Like maybe I was made to do this and not my sisters, or the other way around? Since I was in junior high, my father used to say, he showed me to use drugs. Like Rafa says, we were part of an environment that it was not as nice. And he showed me that, and my sisters, they could not even go out. If they were with a guy, he would go and get them, pull them, and hit them. And he would like to be with me. Psychological mistreat was so much that my mother would be upset. And when I was 14, you know, I was sick of my mom because I was the same as my dad. I didn't respect him much, but quote unquote, because that's not, you know, that's not real respect. And I could get home and do bad things in front of them. But you can see a difference. Yes, of course, you can see a difference. And I could see a difference even more with my parents. My father would say, we're men, we can do a lot of things. I'm your father. And don't be upset because I'm your father, we are men, and we can do anything we want. But when he would split from my mom, he says, oh, if your mother finds somebody else, we're gonna kill him. But I have never liked being like that. Generation after generation, that's what I was telling Rafa. We should not follow the pattern, but to break it. And not to be, for people to be afraid of you. It's better to be in a better situation and you could see a difference. So for my dad, we could do things, and even with my sister, she's married, and I can tell he goes with my brother-in-law, and they go out and they party together. And you can tell a difference how he treats my brother-in-law. It might seem that it's the past, but everything happens all over again. Israel, do you want to tell me a little bit if you grew up seeing differences between your education and the one of girls in your family? Yes, of course. Most of men who grew up in the family, we have a degree, some have a master's or PhD, all men. Most women, particularly my cousins, I have one in particular, that when we were young, they would tell them, you have to learn how to cook so you can take care of your husband, so you can raise your children, because that's what you're going to have to do. Always, I have always really seen her as a sister, and when we would go out and party, she had to ask for permission to go out, to have fun. And myself and the rest of my male cousins, we could do whatever we wanted. I recall now, and this is something that I didn't realize before, that at least thanks to Hindis, I was able to see this at the family gatherings, particularly when the entire family was together. The last ones to sit down were the girls, the women. And I recall this cousin that one time we were all hungry. She sat down and somebody said, let's wait for the men to eat first. Let's serve them and then you can eat. And maybe I'm one of those people that I pick up my plate after lunch and they said, no, Sophie can pick it up. You can go and play with your cousins. That's the way, and that was normal, yeah. I had a really bad message. Oh yeah, they're all women. That's what they're for. It's very sad. It's very sad. I'm so ashamed. That's why it's so difficult for me to show myself in front of you. I think that's violence is dark and it makes you ashamed. We can't hear you, Tanya. Can you hear me? It's a little bit better. We can't hear you. Okay. Can you hear us? Yes, we can't hear you close. If it's okay, we will continue with the next question so we don't run out of time. I would like to ask Wipo and Israel, how has the program had an impact on you? Supera and Gendes. What changes have you had from this program, Wipo? Tell me a little bit about this. The way that I think, to consider the people that I love. I had split up from my partner, and I said, I don't give a damn if they're with me or not. It was a very macho type of way of doing things. In the way that this impacted my life, it made me to believe in me that I can do whatever I want and that I can really get ahead. So many people have said you can, and these people believe in me, and thanks to these people, I'm here today. And that's not what I wanted to do. I said, oh, you know, I want to do this. And the truth is, I started thinking about my family. I started to think about myself. That had an impact to value myself, to want it to be something in life so my daughter can feel proud of me and that the patterns don't repeat. Thank you, Rafa. Thank you so much. Israel, if you can tell us, how has the program had Hendes in your experience? I'm going to tell you something very specific. I used to be one of the guys that would be in traffic and you would honk your horn and I would get out of my car and I would break the mirror on your car. I did that. I did that more than once. If you would say something, if you would say a bad word to me, I would say, I'm going to do something to you. I'm going to hit you. That's the way I used to be. And what do you think now when this type of situations happen? What knowledge, what have you learned from Adhendes? And how has this helped you, you know, just do something else, something different? I think of my father often. Sometimes I think that people had a bad day, that they don't feel well, or maybe they're afraid. And this happens in traffic, and it happens often, that they cut you off or they start getting aggressive. And now I think, well, maybe he does not feeling well today. Maybe he's had a bad day like I did sometime. I don't want to fall into that situation ever again, because now I value my life. And I don't know. I can tell you by reading a little bit on the different articles that we have to read at Gendes, if I want to die in a dignified manner, I have to live in a dignified manner. And for that, I have to be free of violence. Thank you. Thank you, Israel. Rafa, something you would like to add with respect to how Supera has transformed the way you live masculinity? Yes, how Supera transformed you and the way that you relate to others, women and other men. Yes, this has helped me. You know, I didn't want to fight my mother, and the first guy that was there, I would just hit him. But you start thinking, you don't know what is behind them. And maybe you can have something that is not worth it. Something that you can solve, talking, meditating, first thinking. And it's better to speak to the truth hurts more than hitting someone, right? You're not gonna get rid of the problem. It helped me just to control myself. And one time I was in a truck and I had just broken up with my wife, and then some guys started to talk to each other, and I started hitting that guy. I made that person bleed, and then they became my friends. And at one point they said, because of getting upset, you're going to send everything, you're going to be losing everything. You have more practice with photography, and it just because of something, you're going to be losing everything. You're going to be losing the opportunity of your life. So we're running out of time here. I want to thank WIPO and Israel for sharing their experience in both programs, and particularly for the advances that you have experienced in your lives. What I would like is to ask Rafa, Jair, and Marco, what's next? What's coming? What do you expect? Tell us a little bit about what's coming, because we're running out of time. With the findings that we had on what men were going through during the lockdown, one of our expectations are to generate tools for men individually, but also collectively. And these tools are not just an investigation that would go deeper in these elements that are taken in crisis, but also that they propose from gender perspective, focus in masculinity, with proposals with the citizenship and proposals of public policies, because we know that if we are able to take care of from our early childhood, the alternate masculinity, we can prevent so many of this, so much of this violence. And this is a lot more than violence. In so many cases, we can re-educate and we can bring conditions in the context that they would bring down the triggers of gender violence. So to acknowledge how else we can contribute to rebuild masculinity, to eradicate these social triggers, because not only we want this to change, but the women have a better quality of life surrounded by all of this. Because there's so many men in jail, then we need to solve these new ways to relate between men and women from the institutional and on. This is a little bit of what we have seen with Gendes, so we can look deeper in what is our job. We get a hold of us so we can look at the spaces with interactions. Thank you so much, Jair, Marco. Thank you so much. Briefly, what's next? What can we do from now on? We've heard what we can do individually before we call ourselves feminists. There's so much to build and rebuild in each and every one of us. I think as men, we need to take charge of this, not only replicating experiences, but in our everyday life. And in a issue of accessibility of this type of topics to citizens. So we need to have empathy of receptive communities, communities that can generate change. A lot of people say that the work that is done in community sometimes is not linked with the process of men, of young men. So to take care of this includes these topics of cross-sectionality and access to these contents, and more people to be part of this, to question themselves, to understand their nature, and we can build this together. A lot of times to bring down this type of resources involves resources, financing, collaboration locally. The example of Supera is one of them. And I believe that we should be building in our cities the bridges for this type of contents to be distributed, to be replicated and scaled up in organizations and governments, because it's good to look at the theory, it's good to have debates, to discuss, but this is not getting to the users, to the people that need the priority and the attention. So I believe that it goes as what comes next. Tell us about your experience as a woman. What would be the impact for peace if this efforts of scaling up can be concreted, as Marco and Jair explained, for this project? We can't hear you. I think at the end of the day, we want to look at this individually. each person, each man, each woman to start working to bring success. I think that's the way that we can start fulfilling and achieving individual peace. Thank you. We have just a couple of minutes. I would like to ask a question, and whoever wants to answer can raise your hand. Jose Luis Garcia says, how has the feminist community welcomed you to join the work of deconstruction as men with different gender roles? Jair, you can tell us. This question is good and it has a lot of history behind. I would like to look at a problem more than just answer, because feminism has an origin and a clear objective that is outside of our hands. As men, we need to acknowledge that we have to learn so much from the feminist movement and academic feminism so we can nurture our movement, our problems, methodologies. And we have to be very clear. A lot of these interventions, because of all of this, one of the first spaces in Mexico, they tried to say what are the roles of all of this. And at these meetings is that we found men in this situation, it's outside of feminism, but looking at everything in the objective. So we need to take on the findings and to generate our own, that is for men, in the reconstruction of masculinity for the complete destruction of patriarchy. And all of this came up and generated certain problems at times. But what's important is that what you ask has been answered. The situations are not going to change only with feminists. The situation have to bring everybody on. Every person has to find what they need to do. The same way that there's a lot of feminism, there's a lot of answers to the questions. I would like to ask men, what do you think? How do you interact with feminism? But particularly look at your own masculinity, including all the spaces where this is reproduced. Thank you, James. Rafa, do you want to say something with respect to this question? There's no question, it's crucial. But we're not talking about war. This is not about who fights and who wins. We're talking about lives. We're talking about female homicides. And there's no question that the unquestionable way to work from this feminist movement to be the partners and to listen from this perspective that the only thing to stop violence again is to listen this critical feminism, to listen to women, to listen that this gender perspective where we take care of all the education models are cared for come from this feminist movements. And this is not about who gets there first. It's not about looking at other movements, but just to reflect on men being allies to stop violence, the one that is executed against the women. And in this, I agree with a lot of my feminist friends because this is basic. we work social rights and reproductive rights from a woman that is our chair, that for 40 years has been at the head of movements for justice. And we want to look at this and all of these movements of the collectives of women that are inside. This is a huge responsibility where we can see a basic topic, which is to stop violence against women. And this can take us to other generations and responsibilities with my children to be able to bring these tools from an analysis of gender perspective that is feminist. We have one more question by a man. What can we do in our daily life to contribute with the construction of positive masculinity? I don't know who wants to answer. I didn't hear this. What can we do in our daily life to contribute to the construction of positive masculinity? Suggestions. The basic part we heard from Wipo. Wipo says, I can think, I can feel. He was talking about meditation. But there's something that we call fatal risk. What is your fatal risk at the time where you're going to be committing violence, you're going to generate, or you're going to think, or you're going to generate a crime, you're going to murder someone? And that fatal risk is based in 3 factors. What ideas are linked to your macho way of living, to your concern, to your pain, to your sadness? What are the ideas that are linked to those feelings that determine actions to stop signals in your body and to stop violence and violent behaviors? What are the emotions that are linked to this? What are the ideas from your partner or women, from your boss, lady boss at work? And that, what are the ideas that you have at a time when you feel that you are being hurt and you act with violence to stop that supposed construction that it's so much. This is not about training, constant work. Also, to invite you to mindfulness, meditation, something that really connected me, and I thought about the group and I thought about my daughter or what I want to do. Thank you. Thank you, Rafa. Any comments, any additional comments so we can close? I would like to hear Israel answer this question. What advice do you have for those that are talking to us about contributing with your own change? Of course, Jair. Israel? Your microphone is muted. Everybody that is listening, do not join efforts with your violence. Be responsible. I think that's a basic part for change. Being responsible for our violence, that's a decision. To say that we execute violence because I have drunk, because I'm afraid, because I'm sad, it's irresponsible. We have to underscore that we have to become responsible, that we have to learn to live in this type of spaces. Yes, we're afraid. Yes, we're all afraid. We're all afraid to talk about our own violence. And at the end, it makes you sensitive. I find that I can be so creative to generate well-being for you and for others. If anybody is interested, and Jaid, if you have the information and you're in a situation like mine, you can call the emergency hotline of Genesis. Thank you, Israel. I would like to thank all of you for your participation in this panel. We have so many ideas with evidence of two beneficiaries that peace with gender, built with gender perspective, can be achieved. And if we look at this from this peace building, thank you for listening, for being with us, for being with us here. I really want to thank you. Thank you. Thanks to our colleagues from GENDES, from CPMEX and GENMEX for this panel. And our friends from Supera, thank you for all the reflections that you have brought. And we wish you a relaxed afternoon after so many things to be able to achieve this panel. And tomorrow we'll reconvene at 9. Women, Security and Mediation, Latin America, Alternatives for Peace Building. This is a panel organized by the Catalonian Institute for Peace, ICID. Tomorrow, November 5 at 9. We'll see you here. And thank you for all the work, CPMEX. Thank you, Tania. And we'll see you tomorrow.